Hey everybody, this is Perch. All right, a lot of you collect comics, and a lot of you put them in boxes, and a lot of you deal with tape and bags and boards and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of us also have had the experience of that going poorly. You've walked in and you've discovered your comic box, your long box is sitting in a pool of water, for example. At that point, you're hoping that you properly have bagged and boarded everything, but you know in your heart you probably haven't. There's pulling a comic that's quite expensive out of a taped bag and board, only to have the tape stick to the comic, and then you're trying to delicately remove it without ripping the paper off. There's a case where you bought cheap boards and you pull a comic out after, it's been a long time, only to find that the board starts crumbling under your fingers and you realize that it's kind of adhered slash turned into dust and has screwed up your book. Anyway, a lot of these things probably have been familiar to some of you. If you've been doing comics for any length of time, you've dealt with that. So, with that, let's read this mail. It says, Dear Perch, the last few days had me doing something I should have done years ago, taping the backs of comics I got in my first 2 or so years of collecting comics. Part of what took me so long to do this is because I was scared about the condition of the earliest comics I got. Sure, I was 11 when I started collecting, and I only started bagging and boarding when I was 12, so of course, logically speaking, some books would be in better shape than others. During my taping experience, the core damage that occurred to my books were the spine bends, which sure might not be all my fault and could just be from shipping. A couple books, like five, had noticeable tears on the cover, and to my dismay, some ink from the back had come off on several of the boards. I don't know if it's from the poor ink quality of Marvel books from 25 or 2015 to 2016, me stuffing my own long boxes of many books as possible, which I did, or some other factor. But if boarding comics is good for them, it seems odd that part of the comic can come off on the back cover. I was never going to sell my earliest comics because of sentimental value, not that they would be worth much outside of my Darth Vader #3, which is in okay shape. Yet I just can't be saddened. I can't help but be saddened about the way they're conditioned because young me spent a couple $100s in comics over a few years and they're in the condition I want them to be in. I guess that's life, but spending $4 per issue kind of makes me protective where I spend my money on. I can still read them, of course. At least the last few years of me collecting have been pretty good condition wise. All right, fair enough. Nice story. Um, so a couple tips. So first off, a lot of people have made comments about this, about the ink being worse in Marvel Comics, and it rubs off, and the pages come together, and all that. And while it is true that there are some issues, it is untrue to say that it only, Marvel basically did something to fuck people over around 2014 to 2018, and the ink was worse. You can look at different eras with Marvel, DC, Indies, and there's been times when the ink was wrong, the paper didn't adhere right, you have strange yellowing, you have colors that come off. A lot of books in the 70s have a problem where if you compact them too much, we'll get to that in a minute, the ink goes from page to page inside the book. So this isn't a big defense of Marvel during that time period, but a lot of people made a lot of noise like comics were 100% perfect until Marvel decided to start screwing people over, and that's just not true. There's been issues for a long time, and I don't know. You can't point to one era where everything was tremendously perfect. I think mentally in people's minds they think they can do that, but if you actually go back and look at it, it's just not the case. It just so happens that when we were younger, we didn't notice some of this shit, and so we get older, and it's like the ink is coming off on my hands. It's like, yeah. You sweaty holding a book is not good. It can start to ripple the pages. All that stuff is very true. But your memory of when you were like 8 and you were getting comics in the 80s, and that the comics were all perfect and ink wasn't doing stuff like that, of course it was. It absolutely was. It's just it has been different. There have been changes. A lot of those changes have not been helpful. I think you can definitely make the argument that, you would think they perfect this process over, 50 years, but, you'd be wrong. So anyway, a lot to unpack there. I mentioned a second ago, but one of the things that I find is a super important kind of tip for collectors is if you're putting your comics in boxes, whether it's a long box, a short box, I highly advocate the plastic boxes. They're more expensive, yes, but man, the quality and the ability for them to hold up is just infinitely better. But what you don't want to do, and I so many people do it, is they cram as many comics into that box as possible. They have the technique where you kind of fill the box, and then you kind of make a gap in the middle, and then you just shove like an extra 20 comics down in there to just really pack them in. And I've heard, It's everything from, hey, I don't want to go buy another box yet, so I'm just cramming them in there, to, hey, if I pack them in really tight, it actually protects them better because it's better for them to bounce around. Those are all coping mechanisms. You don't want your comics flopping around in there, but you don't want to have to cram in. It should be a nice, loose, tight fit, meaning, the comics aren't shuffling around when you're moving it from side to side, but a little bit of give is good. If you ram them in, you're opening yourself up to multiple problems. First off, the staples won't do well in that situation. It'll start to bend, poke, they can prod into the comic behind them. Like the staples get weird in that scenario. It definitely puts more pressure if there is ink and printing problems for that ink to come off on the board or the bag, or, all kinds of things. It can make older comics, the pages actually more brittle, because as they age, when they're really tightly crammed into each other, the paper almost becomes like tissue paper. It's just not a good sign. So if you have, if you're listening to this like, oh man, I think I've done that, go out, find your boxes, buy one extra box, and then take some stuff out of there. The other thing, the people who use the shove in the middle method, the odds of you bending your comic are like times 10 in that scenario, because you're cramming the comics in. The comics that are on either side of it start to roll under it. Like, you are screwing yourself if you're doing that kind of stuff. Um, with tape, I think there is tape that you can get, which is still sticky and everything else, but it's not that, glue type tape. I think sometimes this is referred to as wrapping paper tape. There's tape that's just better for you. That if it does stick to a comic, or, it also won't turn like gummy over time, which some tape does. So it is actually a good investment to just get good quality material. And in particular, boards. You can save a couple bucks on boards on Amazon if you buy kind of, I don't know, cheaper boards, but you eat it on the quality. They can absolutely dissolve into the book. There's just bad stuff. One of the things that I think I hate, but I know other people like, is the idea that you have, the comic bag is pre-sticky, so you don't need tape at all. It goes. I hate those things. There's some people who swear by them. I think you've got a long band of adhesive on the bottom of that bag. You're increasing the chance that it is going to stick to the comic. When I get bags like that and I have to use them, I just don't take the little plastic film off the bag, and I just tape it down anyway using my own means, and I don't use that thing. I wouldn't. Um, but generally collecting, look, I think you have the right attitude of, as much as you can. Yes, you're putting money into it, but, disasters do happen. You can't beat yourself up too much on them. You need to, have some perspective. In theory, you're enjoying this comic, you're enjoying collecting them, you're enjoying the memories of it. All that stuff is good stuff. And the more you can kind of just try and have that perspective, probably the better off you are. Because otherwise, you can quickly drive yourself nuts, in a real hurry. But anyway, what are your techniques? Let me know in the comments below what you do with comics to collect them, preserve them, what kind of disasters you had. Give everybody that spine tingling chill of the that we can all visualize of when these comics are bad. There's somebody I know who came in once. He was buying comics for a long time. He comes in one day and his cat decided to kind of lay on the comics, which he thought was cute. But then the cat decided to pee on the comics, so the pee got into the comic. Yeah, all that is terrible. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. Any horror stories you want to share? Thanks for the mail, and thanks for listening.